It started like any other Monday morning in Manhattan. The lobby of Citadel First Bank glowed beneath high ceilings and polished brass. Floor-to-ceiling windows welcomed the sun in sharp golden shafts, dancing across marble floors and chrome accents. Everything exuded order, polished, efficient, routine. But beneath the polished surface, something else stirred, and it awakened the moment Elijah Cross stepped through the door. He didn't look like a man used to commanding rooms, though he had. No expensive briefcase, no Rolex, no tailored three-piece suit, just clean jeans, a navy sweatshirt, and loafers. He looked like any other middle-aged man going about his day. But what he carried in his pocket was far from ordinary. A $50,000 check from one of his own companies, made out to him personally. Elijah had come to cash it, nothing more. A straightforward transaction, or so he thought. He approached the counter calmly and handed his ID and the check to the teller. Jessica Vaughn, a professional woman in her 30s, with a rigid smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her fingers paused mid-motion as she glanced at the amount. Then her eyes swept up to Elijah's face. Her demeanor changed. Gone was the generic politeness. In its place, distance, suspicion. "I'll need to check something. One moment," she said curtly, disappearing behind a frosted glass door. Elijah waited, watched, and thought. Just 2 windows down, a white man in a sleek gray suit had just walked in, and within 2 minutes walked out again, with a $75,000 withdrawal, a smile from the teller, and no questions asked. Elijah noticed. So did others. But no one said a word. 5 minutes passed, then 10. When Jessica returned, her tone had sharpened, masked under the brittle shell of policy. She asked where the check came from, what the money was for, whether he could provide proof of business activity. The questions weren't about verification, they were about validation. And they weren't really questions at all. They were accusations wrapped in polite phrasing. Elijah remained calm, answered clearly, offered business documentation. But it didn't matter. Jessica didn't lean forward to listen. She leaned back, as if preparing for trouble. Without warning, her hand dipped below the desk. At the far end of the lobby, Kyle Whitman, a tall, muscular security guard in a dark blue uniform, began moving toward Elijah. No greeting, no inquiry. Just slow, heavy steps. The kind of steps that weren't meant to protect, but to remove. In that instant, the air in the bank thickened. Other customers turned away. Some whispered. Others pretended not to see. It was a story written into American walls. Don't look, don't speak, just watch. But what no one realized was this. Elijah Cross wasn't just a man with a check. He was about to own the very institution trying to push him out. If this story made your heart skip, you're not alone. Comment the number 7 if you've ever been unfairly judged or witnessed someone treated differently for how they look. Subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of justice, truth, and unexpected twists. Share this video to spread awareness, and stay with us for what happens next. Because trust us, this isn't just a bank visit, this is a reckoning. The silence didn't feel empty, it felt loaded. As Jessica Vaughn returned to her station, something in the atmosphere of the bank had shifted. She didn't make eye contact with Elijah Cross, didn't offer so much as a manufactured smile. She moved slowly, deliberately, like someone stalling for time or searching for a way out. Behind the counter, her fingers danced anxiously along the edge of the keyboard, but her eyes betrayed her. They weren't scanning for data. They were scanning for confirmation, or maybe for permission. Elijah Cross, she repeated slowly, as if trying out a name she wasn't sure she should say aloud. Her voice now carried a clipped tone, dressed up as professionalism, but hollow beneath the surface. We're going to need some additional verification. Do you mind telling us the exact purpose of this transaction? Elijah raised an eyebrow. It's a check from my holding company. I'm cashing it. That's the purpose. Jessica hesitated, clearly unprepared for a direct answer. Yes, well, it's just that this amount, it's not typical. Elijah didn't respond right away. His gaze drifted to the transaction screen on her monitor. He saw his account details. Everything was there, clean, verified, well documented. The check had cleared before he even arrived. There was nothing untypical about it. But she didn't move, didn't type. She was waiting for something. That's when Elijah noticed it. A faint shift in her posture, a slight turn of the head, the briefest glance toward the back office, where branch manager Denise Holloway stood behind a pane of smoked glass, arms folded across her chest. She wasn't coming out, not yet, but she was watching. Her presence was a silent cue, and Jessica had received it loud and clear. Elijah saw it for what it was, a nonverbal baton pass from teller to manager, an unspoken language of institutional bias. There was no alarm, no shouting, no overt denial. Just a quiet choreography, practiced and perfected over years. Stall, delay, defer, escalate. When the customer doesn't look right. Across the lobby, customers came and went with ease. An older white man joked with a teller. A couple in business attire laughed as they signed mortgage papers. It was life as usual for everyone else. Elijah, however, remained frozen in a space where he suddenly felt both hyper-visible and completely ignored. He leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice but not its strength. "I see what's happening here, and I'd like to know exactly what you're waiting for." Jessica stiffened. She didn't answer. Instead, she opened a drawer and slowly slid out a thin blue form, a secondary verification slip, typically used for flagged accounts or suspicious activity. It wasn't standard for this kind of transaction, and they both knew it. "I'm just following protocol," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elijah let the words hang in the air for a moment, then nodded slowly, absorbing them. Not because he accepted them, but because he had heard them too many times before. Protocol wasn't the problem. Prejudice hiding inside protocol was. And still, Denise didn't come out. Still, Jessica didn't move forward. Still, the transaction sat idle. All it took was a glance, a silent signal. And suddenly, the man who had built financial empires was being treated like an imposter in a building he could have bought twice over. And no one said a word. The click of heels against the marble floor broke the heavy silence. Denise Holloway emerged from behind the smoked glass door like a judge descending from chambers, measured, poised, already convinced. Her fitted blazer hugged her frame like armor, and her face was a portrait of practiced professionalism. Eyebrows slightly arched, lips pressed into a tight line, eyes sharp behind designer frames. She didn't look at Elijah as a person. She looked at him like a problem to be solved, managed, or moved along. "Elijah Cross?" she asked, though the name wasn't really a question. He nodded. "That's me." Denise smiled, thin and rehearsed. "I understand you're attempting to cash a large check today?" "Attempting?" he echoed, his voice even. "Yes, that's correct." She offered a polite chuckle that didn't touch her eyes. "You understand, of course, that for security reasons, transactions of this size often require additional verification. It's standard procedure." Elijah glanced at Jessica, then back at the manager. "Is that so? Because the gentleman 2 windows down cashed a larger check 10 minutes ago. No questions, no extra forms, no managers, no protocol." Denise's eyes didn't flinch, but there was a subtle shift in her posture. Shoulders stiffened, chin raised slightly higher. "I can't speak to other customers' transactions, Mr. Cross. But in this case, we have to be extra cautious. I'm sure you understand." "No," Elijah said plainly. "I actually don't." A brief silence followed, taut as a pulled string. Denise's smile vanished. She motioned toward Jessica. "Did you already complete a secondary verification?" Jessica hesitated, eyes flicking back and forth, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. "She started to," Elijah cut in, "but it seems this decision wasn't really in her hands, was it?" That struck a nerve. Denise's jaw tightened, just for a second. "Sir, we're simply doing our due diligence. This isn't personal." "But it is selective," Elijah countered, "and we both know selective enforcement is the first cousin of discrimination." It landed like a gavel in the middle of the lobby. Jessica shifted uncomfortably behind the counter. A few customers turned subtly, pretending not to eavesdrop while leaning just slightly closer. Denise's voice dropped an octave. "If you're accusing this institution of something improper, I'd suggest you take that up with our legal department." "I'm not accusing," Elijah said calmly. "I'm observing. And what I've seen is clear. Denise leaned in, her tone hardening beneath the gloss. If you can't comply with verification, we will have no choice but to deny this transaction. Elijah met her gaze unwavering. And what exactly do you think I'm refusing to comply with? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. In her silence, everything was said. The decision had already been made the moment she walked out of that office. She wasn't there to evaluate. She was there to dismiss, not based on the check, not based on the paperwork, but based on him. And in that moment, the bank no longer felt like a place of business. It felt like a stage where the same play had been performed far too many times, with different names, same outcome. Elijah stood still, but inside something began to shift. Something was coming, something they couldn't control. The moment Denise Holloway gave the subtle nod, it was as though gravity shifted. Kyle Whitman, the bank's head of security, stood up straight from his post near the front entrance. His shoulders squared, his hand instinctively touched the radio clipped to his chest, though no words passed through it. He didn't need instruction, he'd seen enough. And just like that, it was no longer about a check. It was about control. He moved toward Elijah Cross with the slow, deliberate pace of a man trained not to ask questions, just to remove obstacles. His steps echoed off the marble tile, heavy and final. Elijah didn't flinch. He had felt this rhythm before. The quiet choreography of escalation, the way silence could shout louder than any alarm. Denise didn't speak. Jessica didn't move. The other tellers suddenly became very invested in their keyboards, pretending not to notice what was unfolding just feet away. "Sir," Kyle said as he approached, voice flat, "I'm going to need you to step outside." Elijah turned slightly, locking eyes with the guard. "Why?" "Manager's request," Kyle replied. His tone was even, almost bored, as if he were asking someone to exit a movie theater, not removing a man from access to his own funds. "I'm not causing a disturbance," Elijah said, voice calm but firm. "I'm standing here, waiting for a transaction to be processed." Kyle didn't blink. "I'm not here to debate. I'm here to escort you out." Without warning, he reached forward and gripped Elijah's arm. Not aggressively, not violently, but with just enough pressure to strip away any illusion that this was still a conversation. Elijah's stance didn't shift, but a sharp inhale gave away the tension coiling in his chest. Across the lobby, a few heads turned. A man near the business services desk paused mid-sentence. A young woman holding a child stopped scrolling her phone. People noticed, but no one intervened. Kyle pulled again, this time harder, guiding Elijah toward the glass doors. As they neared the exit, Elijah's shoulder clipped against the edge of a column, sending a ripple of discomfort through his frame. Still, he kept his head high. No resistance, just dignity under siege. The doors parted with a hiss, and the cold air of the city struck Elijah's face like a slap. Kyle released him at the curb, stepped back inside without a word, and then, without ceremony, tossed Elijah's driver's license out after him. The plastic card spun in the air and landed at Elijah's feet with a lifeless clack. For a moment, he didn't move. He just stared at it, the very ID they never bothered to look at, the proof of his identity, of his place, of his worth, and they had discarded it like trash. Inside, the bank resumed its quiet rhythm, as if nothing had happened, but everything had. The world may have returned to business as usual, but Elijah Cross had not. And this time, he wasn't walking away quietly. The chill of the morning air hadn't yet settled on Elijah Cross's skin before the glass doors of Citadel First Bank slid shut behind him. For a moment, he stood perfectly still, the click of his ID card hitting the pavement echoing louder than the voices inside. He bent slowly, picked it up, and wiped away a faint smudge with the edge of his sleeve. The small plastic rectangle, discarded like trash, gleamed briefly in the sun. It wasn't just an ID, it was a trigger. He stared at it for a long beat, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. One swipe. Face recognition unlocked. He didn't record, not yet. He made a call. "Activate it," he said flatly. A pause on the other end. "You're sure?" a voice asked. Elijah's reply was short, clipped, and final. "Now." Then he hung up. Back inside, through the tinted glass, the world had resumed its rhythm. Tellers nodded. Customers smiled. Jessica returned to her seat. Denise Holloway paced calmly across the floor. Kyle, now back at his post, leaned casually against the doorframe like nothing had happened. But Elijah wasn't watching them as a victim. He was watching them as a hunter in plain sight. Because what no one inside the bank knew, what not a single soul behind those counters could have imagined, was that Elijah Cross wasn't just another customer with a large check. He was one of the largest silent investors in Citadel's corporate acquisition strategy. And effective just 12 hours earlier, thanks to a fast-track deal inked over the weekend, Elijah had become the majority shareholder in the parent company that owned this branch. He could have walked in as a boss. Instead, they forced him out like a threat. And now the eye they never saw was watching everything. From his phone, a quiet data stream had already been activated. Internal audits, transaction history flags, surveillance backups syncing to cloud servers. He hadn't come alone, not really. Digital eyes were everywhere, watching what was said, what wasn't said, what should have been done, and wasn't. To passers-by, Elijah was just a man standing on the curb, checking his phone. But inside, a system of accountability had been quietly awakened. One that Denise, Jessica, and Kyle would soon feel closing in around them. And this wasn't revenge. This was justice, with receipts. If this story has you holding your breath, you're not alone. Comment the number 7 if you're rooting for Elijah to take this all the way. Or press 0 if you think this story is overhyped. We want to know what you think. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories of injustice turned upside down. Share this story and stay tuned, because the real twist is still coming. This isn't about a check anymore. It's about what happens when the watch becomes the watcher. The black SUV pulled up to the curb with the quiet authority of something that didn't need to announce itself. Its windows were tinted, its body spotless, and the engine idled with a low, confident purr of precision. The driver barely had time to shift into park before the rear door swung open, and out stepped a woman in a slate-gray pantsuit, heels clicking like gunshots on the pavement. Savannah Gray, interim CEO of Stonewell Financial Group, moved with the practiced ease of someone used to being obeyed. Her arrival wasn't dramatic, it was surgical. Elijah Cross followed a moment later, stepping out behind her in the same navy sweatshirt and jeans they had judged him for. But now everything about him had changed. The posture, the presence. He wasn't just a man holding a check. He was the man who held the future of this entire bank in his hands. From inside the lobby, Jessica saw the SUV first. She paused mid-sentence, her words freezing in her throat. Denise Holloway, who had just resumed her walk across the floor, caught a glimpse of Elijah through the glass and stopped dead in her tracks. There was a flicker in her eyes. Not recognition, not quite fear, something closer to realization. The doors parted. The room went still. Savannah entered first, scanning the lobby like a general on a battlefield. Elijah followed, calm, measured, unreadable. The echo of their footsteps bounced against tile and steel. No one spoke. No one dared. Kyle, the security guard who had manhandled Elijah just minutes earlier, stood frozen near the door. His jaw tensed as his eyes flicked to Savannah's ID badge, then back to Elijah. The man he'd put hands on was no longer just a customer. He was the man above the chain of command. "Elijah," Savannah said crisply, her voice slicing through the tension. "Where would you like to begin?" He didn't answer right away. He walked instead, straight through the middle of the lobby he had been thrown from, toward the same counter where Jessica now stood pale and rigid. Behind her, Denise scrambled to collect herself, smoothing the front of her blazer like it might undo what had already been done. "I'd like to begin," Elijah finally said, his voice low and resolute, "by seeing the footage." Every second, Savannah nodded once. "Already requested. Also flagged your personal file in this morning's transaction log for external audit." The bank employees didn't speak. They didn't move, because deep down they all understood. This was no longer a transaction dispute. This was exposure. This was reckoning. This was the return of a man they dismissed, judged, and expelled. Now standing in the center of their world, with the weight of the company behind him, and none of them could stop what was coming next. The silence inside Citadel First Bank was no longer calm. It was tense. crackling like static in the air before a lightning strike. Savannah Gray didn't need to raise her voice. With a few sharp directives, the veil of normalcy began to peel back. "Pull up all footage from 9 to 10:15, she said to the assistant manager, who stumbled out from a back office, wide-eyed and flushed. "And I want a printout of all check-cashing transactions this morning, now." The lobby became a pressure cooker. Customers paused their conversations. Tellers whispered. The staff who had moments earlier operated with robotic precision now scrambled like dominoes wobbling before a fall. Elijah didn't speak much. He didn't need to. He simply walked toward the service counter where the confrontation had started, tracing every step of the morning's humiliation. Jessica Vaughn stood behind her station like a statue, pale, rigid, her mouth pressed shut in a line too tight to speak. She had seen people get written up before, but this wasn't disciplinary action. This was judgment. Behind them, Denise Holloway was on the phone, her voice hushed, her face visibly shaken. She turned to Savannah, trying to mask the panic curling in her throat. "I was under the impression we were handling a fraud attempt. That's how it appeared." "Is that your official statement?" Savannah asked, not looking up from the screen where camera footage now played. "Because if it is, I suggest you stick to it. It will be on record." Denise opened her mouth, then closed it again. The first clip rolled across the screen. Elijah approaching the counter, handing over his ID, the check, standing patiently. Then the footage of Jessica hesitating, making no effort to verify the documents. Another screen showed a white customer at the next window, cashing a larger check in under 2 minutes. No hesitation, no manager, no security. Savannah paused the video. "Tell me, Jessica," she said calmly, "why wasn't this man asked for additional verification?" Jessica's mouth moved, but no sound came out. "It's policy, right?" Savannah added. "So, why was it applied to only one of them?" No one answered. The room didn't need words. The images said it all. In the silence that followed, Elijah turned to Denise. "Did you even check my account before escalating?" Denise looked like a deflated balloon. I followed protocol." "No," Elijah replied. "You followed a pattern." That was the moment the collapse truly began. The internal investigation, launched seconds after Elijah's call, had already turned up an internal memo, authored by Denise, flagging certain non-standard clientele for heightened caution. The language was subtle, but unmistakably biased. Coded racism dressed in corporate vocabulary. Savannah scanned the printed memo and placed it on the counter like a courtroom exhibit. "This," she said, her voice as cold as the marble floors beneath them, "is grounds for termination." Denise's face drained of color. Jessica backed away from her post, whispering something to a colleague who suddenly found a reason to walk away. Even Kyle Whitman, the guard who had put his hands on Elijah, was shrinking now, his confident stance hollowed out by the realization that he was no longer on the right side of authority. What had begun as a simple check withdrawal had become a slow, methodical collapse of power built on prejudice. And Elijah hadn't raised his voice once. The air in the bank was thick now, not with panic, but with consequence. It hung in the corners like smoke after a fire, clinging to every surface, every breath. No one moved with confidence anymore. The quiet hum of printers, the distant shuffle of papers, the faint ding of the front door, all of it felt small under the weight of what had just been revealed. Savannah Gray didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Authority didn't need volume. It needed clarity. She stood behind the counter, a single sheet of paper in her hand, the internal memo that had exposed the culture hiding behind the marble and glass. One paragraph was all it took to unravel years of silent practices. One phrase, non-standard clientele, was all the evidence needed. She turned to Denise Holloway, whose face was now drained of all the confidence and control she'd wielded only an hour earlier. The woman who had once walked the floor like she owned it now stood like a child awaiting punishment. "You're dismissed," Savannah said simply. Denise's mouth opened as if to protest, but no words came out. She glanced at the security cameras still rolling, at the employees who had seen everything, and then at Elijah Cross, who had not once raised his voice, but had undone her career with nothing more than the truth. "This is completely unnecessary," she finally whispered, almost to herself. Elijah turned toward her slowly. His voice was quiet, calm, razor sharp. "You had me escorted out like a criminal. You dismissed my credentials. You refused to verify what was already in front of you. You judged me before you even saw me. So tell me, Denise, what part of this is unnecessary?" Her mouth closed again. Her eyes dropped. Savannah shifted her attention. "Jessica Vaughn," she said, her tone just as even. "Your employment is terminated immediately. HR will follow up regarding your failure to apply policy evenly and your role in today's escalation." Jessica didn't argue. She simply nodded, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly as she backed away from the counter. And then Savannah turned to Kyle Whitman, still standing near the door, his jaw clenched, his posture now defensive rather than authoritative. "You laid hands on a client," she said. "You removed him from the premises without confirming his account status. You took orders without verification. And more importantly, you did it without hesitation." Kyle looked up, eyes flaring with a hint of something. Shame, defiance, regret. It was hard to say. "I followed the manager's lead," he muttered. Savannah didn't blink. "Then you should have known better. As of this moment, you are suspended without pay pending formal review. Security protocol will be rewritten because of you." For a moment, the only sound was the buzz of the fluorescent lights above them. Elijah, standing at the heart of the bank he had been forced out of, exhaled slowly. He wasn't angry, he was tired. Tired of repeating this story in 1,000 different versions across 1,000 different places. But this time, he had the power to change the ending. He looked to the far side of the lobby, where a junior teller, no older than 22, stood motionless, having watched everything unfold. She hadn't spoken, but she hadn't looked away either. Their eyes met, and she nodded. Sometimes change didn't come in roars. It came in reckoning. Elijah turned back to Savannah. "Anything else you want to say?" she asked him quietly. He shook his head. Number, they said enough already. And with that, the judgment was complete. Not through anger, not through chaos, but through something far more devastating to institutions built on silence: accountability. The lobby of Citadel First Bank was quiet again, but the silence now carried weight. It wasn't the strained silence of avoidance or judgment. It was the stunned hush that follows a reckoning, the kind that makes people rethink the way they show up in the world. Elijah Cross stood at the center of it all, unmoved by the glances that followed him, unshaken by the path he had just carved through the institution's facade. He didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate. There was no smile of satisfaction on his face, just the composed presence of a man who had once again been forced to fight for the kind of respect that should have never been withheld. Savannah handed him a folder, documentation of the full investigation, confirmation of terminations, a list of procedural reforms to be implemented across every branch. "It's done," she said. He looked down at it, then back at the space around him. "Not yet," Elijah murmured. He walked over to the very counter where it had all started, where Jessica had once pushed his ID aside without a second glance. The counter was empty now. No teller, no judgment. Just the polished surface reflecting back his image. Solid, clear, unbroken. He placed his hands on the edge, not in anger, but in reclamation. This space, this bank, this industry, it was never just about money. It was about access, about dignity, about who is seen as trustworthy and who is seen as a threat. Elijah knew that better than most. He had spent his career climbing walls built to keep people like him out, only to find that even after reaching the top, the locks were still there, just with shinier keys and deeper codes. But today, something shifted. Not because the people in charge wanted it to, but because someone finally refused to be quiet, refused to play along. He turned to face the remaining staff, some shaken, some curious, all changed in ways they hadn't yet processed. A few employees lowered their eyes. One or two held his gaze. No one spoke. No one needed to. Elijah didn't give a speech. He didn't need to. His presence alone was a statement, his silence more powerful than outrage. He walked toward the exit at his own pace. The same doors that had once spit him out now, parting with deference. But before he crossed the threshold, he paused. To his right stood the junior teller, the one who had watched everything unfold with wide, unblinking eyes. She didn't flinch. didn't turn away. She simply nodded, a gesture both subtle and sincere. Elijah returned the nod. It wasn't gratitude, it was acknowledgement. Then he stepped outside, the cold air meeting him once again. But this time, not as rejection, but release. A light wind caught the corner of the folder in his hand, lifting it slightly before settling it back into place. The city moved around him as it always had. Horns blaring, people rushing, life demanding. But something in the rhythm felt different, slower, more aware. He didn't look back. There was no need to. The past had already been dealt with. And the future? The future belonged to those willing to stand tall in the face of quiet injustice and move forward without losing who they are. Elijah walked down the steps, one steady step at a time, not toward revenge, not toward applause, but towards something far more enduring: redemption. Not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been told, without words, that they didn't belong in the very place they helped build. Some stories aren't just meant to be told. They're meant to be remembered. They're meant to be thought about. And they change the way we see the world, or at least the way we walk in it. Elijah Cross's story isn't just a lesson in discrimination. It's a vivid reminder that dignity can be questioned for a moment, but true worth will always prevail if we're strong enough to hold on to it. Elijah walks into the bank like a normal person, no prestige, no status. He just wants to make a simple transaction like everyone else. But in the eyes of those who don't look closely, he is different. Not because of his actions, not because of his paperwork, but because of the image they have built into their heads. And in that moment, we witness something painfully familiar. Silent prejudice can be louder than the truth. For older viewers, those who have lived through America's many changes, this story is not new. Many of you have witnessed or lived through the years when skin color, dress, accent, or a look were enough to determine who was trusted and who was ostracized. Though times have changed, the manifestations of prejudice have never gone away. They have only become more subtle, more insidious, and sometimes disguised as process or policy. But what makes this story memorable is not the humiliation. It's how Elijah chose to retaliate not with anger, but with truth and character. He didn't scream, he didn't bang on the table. He let the facts speak for themselves. And when the truth came out, no one could deny the obvious. The system was wrong, not the people who were being eliminated. This is a lesson that all of us, regardless of age, skin color, or past, should remember. Politeness is not fairness, and silence is not neutral. If we do not dare to speak up when we see others being treated unfairly, then when we are involved, who will stand up for us? For young people, it's a reminder that fame is not immune to prejudice. For middle-aged people, it's a reminder that true success isn't about the power you have, but how you use it. And for older people, those who have watched America change over the decades, it's a reminder that there's still a lot to change, but only if someone stands up, like Elijah did. Ultimately, the story is more than a personal blowback. It's a triumph for decency, intelligence, and courage. Elijah doesn't tear down the system. He fixes it from within, with truth, with justice, and with indomitability. And that is something we all, at any age, can learn. When doubted, let dignity answer. When rejected, let truth guide. And when faced with injustice, don't let silence be an option. If you find this story emotional and valuable, please subscribe to the channel to continue accompanying us in the next videos. Comment with the number 7 if you feel moved and believe that the truth always needs to be spoken. If you disagree or want to contribute, comment with the number 0. We appreciate every perspective. And don't forget to share this video to spread the message. Human dignity is the foundation of a fair society, because sometimes a story is all it takes to spark change.